No, I'm you right now. Hi, good morning, good morning, good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today at the side event on accelerating financing for climate action, progress across the Asia Pacific region, both in person and to those joining online today. So we're about to get started. Please kindly note that this meeting will be recorded and posted afterwards. Today, we will hear from both the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action and the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance. Now, please allow me to pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Remco van Wijngaarden, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Thailand and Permanent Representative to ESCAP for his opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me, distinguished delegates, distinguished panelists, and dear guests, good to see you all here. And on behalf of the Netherlands, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you. Thank you for being here, both in person as virtually, I understand. But first, before I start, I would like to thank Finland, my colleagues here, for their leadership and support within the framework of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Thank you for all your work on this. And express my gratitude to the UN ESCAP colleagues for their efforts to realize this side event, and to our current co-chair Indonesia for their partnership on this. So I will call it the coalition from now, if you don't mind me. It's a long title. So the coalition is a global member-driven initiative with currently over 90 members worldwide, and 70 countries here in this region. And we are all guided by the Helsinki principles. Focus of the coalition is to exchange best practices and common challenges within the responsibilities of the ministries of finance, to accelerate climate action. And the Netherlands is honored to be the co-chair of the coalition since April 2023, together with our esteemed co-chair Indonesia. Apart from our shared priorities, shared strategic priorities, the Netherlands is specifically championing the mobilization of adaptation finance and phasing out harmful financial incentives within the framework of the coalition. And today's event aims to delve deeper into perspectives from ESCAP members, ESCAP member states on the possibilities and challenges in implementing the Helsinki principles in the Asia-Pacific region, and how peer learning and regional cooperation could accelerate the financing of climate action. And climate action, as you all know, requires a comprehensive approach. This is not a challenge that any country can solve alone. It demands collaboration, innovation, and shared responsibilities. The flagship report from the coalition called Strengthening the Role of Ministries of Finance in Driving Climate Action will be discussed in relation to the implications for the Asia-Pacific region. Furthermore, the second edition of the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance report, which highlights how off track, unfortunately, the world is from the Paris goals, will be discussed. We sincerely hope that the session today will shed some light on how the coalition can contribute to climate goals in this region. And perhaps some countries that are not yet part of the coalition might consider joining and participating. If you have any questions about the coalition, feel free to approach me or my colleagues, or Yuri, my Finnish colleague, and we will gladly guide you through. Dear friends, I will not take too much of your time, as we need the limited time we have today for our distinguished speakers and the panel discussion. Thank you for your contributions already, and thank you for your active participation today in this event. I wish you all a very productive discussion. Thank you.
Excellency, thank you very much for those remarks. Now let me pass the floor to Mr. Hamza Ali Malik, Director of the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division from ESCAP, as moderator for the event.
Thank you, Win. Thank you, Ambassador Remco. It's a great pleasure, actually, to moderate this session today in the company of very distinguished panelists. Welcome, everyone, dear colleagues, friends. Let me start by introducing our distinguished panelists. First, we have Mr. Pekka Moren, the Special Representative of Finance Ministry from Finland and co-founder of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Mr. Pekka's commitment is commendable. He's joining us, I believe, from Washington, and I think it's 1:50 a.m. at the moment. So thank you very much, Pekka, for exhibiting great energy and commitment to the cause. Second, we have Mr. Amar Bhattacharya also joining us online. He is the Executive Secretary of the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance and a Senior Fellow in the Center for Sustainable Development from Brookings Institutions, USA. Amar, I also believe, is in Washington, and same time zone applies to him as well. Thank you, Amar. Most welcome. We're also joined by Miss Maria. No, we also joined by Miss Yeda Mary Diaz, the Senior Policy Counsel of the Office of the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Undersecretary of the Climate Finance Policy Group from the Department of Finance, Government of Philippines. And next we have Ms. Liske van Hemert, Policy Advisor for the Co-Chair of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action from the Ministry of Finance, Netherlands. And in person, I am joined by my colleague, Ms. Suba Sivakumaran, Section Chief of the Financing for Development Section at the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division of ESCAP. Let us start with short presentations from the coalition and from the high-level independent group on financing climate action. This will help us get some sort of context and basic understanding of the issues that we will be discussing. And then the second part, we'll have some questions for our panelists. So let me invite Pekka from the Coalition of Finance Ministers to start the proceedings. Pekka, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I thank you for presenting the slides. Thank you, Hamza. Thank you, and ESCAP, and special thanks to the colleagues of Netherlands for taking the work of the coalition to the next level and leading the work now with Indonesia. I'm going to present you quickly the guidebook, the framework guide that will answer to the question how the climate governance should be changed in order to mobilize finance. And this is the product that we engaged more than 100 experts last year and 30 countries, finance ministries. I will now present it briefly. But first, let me just highlight, if I can have the next slide, please, that particularly in Asia, there is a lot of potential for the coalition to grow, and that's why it's so important to be able to present this work to you. Just 2-3 weeks ago, had the opportunity to present the guide to the ASEAN finance ministers in Laos, and it was a very fruitful discussion. I will come back to the outcome of that meeting in the final words of my presentation. But could I have the next slide, please? So this is why finance ministers are so important in mobilizing green finance. There are 6 reasons. Firstly, to design the overall economic policy at the national level, and of course using the fiscal tools, expenditure and revenues. The picture on the right shows that 1/3 on average of the total GDP is the size of the government budgets on average. So we're talking about, on expenditure side, a very significant numbers. But more broadly, it's more than that. Financial policy and debt management, all the design of the financial instruments of the individual countries. Then developing the sustainable financial markets. I think taxonomies, for example, different regulatory elements that need to be included, and ensuring financial stability together with central banks. Then many finance ministries steer the ownership of government-owned entities, enterprises, development banks, and so forth. And what you are doing regionally here today, and what we did in DC. I came home last night, by the way. So I'm from Helsinki now. So networking and working together at the international level. Could I have the next slide, please? The guidebook includes 140 country examples on different countries, member countries, how the finance ministry's role has been stepped up. I think there are, in the development country side, I would mention US and Denmark as countries who have really taken on the whole government approach, and the role of finance ministries have been enhanced in the past couple of years. So they take the leading role in design of climate policies. We have today's panel also. The Philippines is a good example where there are finance ministry has engaged very strongly and deeply, and also contributed to the coalition's work in the past couple of years. The next slide, please. So please have a look at the guide on those examples. There are 140 examples. It's a big package, but it's very easily accessible, the guidebook. But there are challenges. The fact is that finance ministries are not sufficiently involved, engaged. For example, in the NDCs, that was a topic last week in the finance ministers meeting, very fruitful discussion on discussing how the finance ministries could be more engaged. But this is like the summary of the main reasons. And last week in DC also, Minister Sri Mulyani of Indonesia was addressing that the understanding of finance ministers on what the climate policy means is the starting point. And of course, the willingness and capabilities to engage. And the fact is, and this is a quite surprising outcome, outcome of the work, that the mandates of the finance ministries are not sufficient. Those countries where finance ministries' role has been enhanced, there's also legal or other basis for them to act. So there's accountability, and also resources have been directed to the finance ministries. Then this, of course, has a direct link to expertise, technical capabilities, and tools. Also last week, in fact this week in Washington, D.C., those tools were developed with the big workshop forum organized by US and Denmark, developed the macroeconomic modeling tools. And of course, strategic vision is important. The next slide, please. So this is the framework. Basically what I just said, summarized: economic policy context, fiscal policy context, financing context, and then importantly, guide explains also how to achieve these objectives in terms of leadership capabilities, capacity building, technical expertise, and human resources across the Helsinki principles. I'm gonna now say a few words about that, the implementation. What are we going to do next? How the coalition can support the work, and how the institutional partners that we have are stepping up efforts in this context. The next slide, please. So 4 key elements. We have been going around, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, in Laos, and we have also country-specific missions. We are planning one mission now in Uganda, for example. They're virtual and physical, to present the guide and discuss the guide, the content of it. And we have created an ambassador network of high-level deputies and former ministers to help in this work. Then capacity building, technical support is important. I will, in my last slide, go to that. And of course, we also develop at national level, regional level, knowledge networks, research networks to support finance ministries. That's absolutely critical element. And what we did last week, what we're doing now, have dialogue with ministries, finance ministers at high level, senior level. That's one important part of learning and sharing experiences. So these 4 areas are the key to implement the guide. And the last slide that I would like to present to you is, I think, important and interesting for you, if I can have that last slide, is a concrete ways of how we engage our institutional partners. So we have 27 institutional partners, and the basic idea of the coalition to work is to engage and scale up activities together with these institutional partners. It's important because many of them are working on the ground in the capitals with our finance ministry colleagues. So on the left-hand side, we have prepared a catalog of different existing capacity building programs, and there are new elements as well being planned. I give an example. 3 weeks ago in Laos, the Asian Development Bank launched a platform, regional platform support the countries, and they will invest on implementing the guide. And you may also wish to check and review. They have produced an excellent report on that topic, and there is a strong cooperation with Asian Development Bank, with the coalition right now. And the same regional angle is there in different other continents. Then a special vehicle, C3A, we call it the C3A, an expert team that has been launched to support the implementation of the guides. There are thematic hubs, and of course the third element is the NDC partnerships work that they are also working on the ground, specifically targeted to support the finance ministries. And lastly, I just want to thank you and glad to give further insights in the panel. And here is also the link to the guide. There are 3 versions: short version, 8 pages, 70 pages, and 250 pages in a very comprehensive package of issues. So do have a look, and any questions, please turn to the Secretariat, the Dutch Indonesian co-chairs, or the authors of this paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pekka, for this succinct yet reasonably comprehensive and very clear presentation, and a menu of options to choose from: short version, medium version, and longer version, which clearly lays out exactly what the coalition is about, what it's trying to achieve, and how it can support member states. And I genuinely really appreciate your commitment once again for joining live despite time difference. Let me now turn to Amar Bhattacharya from the Independent High-Level Expert Group on Climate Finance. Amar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hamza. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure that the sound is correct, whatever the time difference is. So as long as you can hear me, that's great. So I wanted to begin by thanking you, Hamza, for inviting me to make this presentation. I also wanted to say that I've had the privilege to work with Pekka on the Coalition of Finance Ministers pretty much since its inception, and his contribution in particular to that coalition has been really, quite remarkable. The next 2 years, we all know, are going to be really a critical period for climate finance. This year, we have to agree on the new collective quantified goal, which are new goals on climate finance. But even beyond just the agreement on the goals, we know that in order to deliver on the ambitious NDCs in the next round, we have to have a climate finance framework that is fit for purpose. So the discussions of climate finance that have been happening, already, I think are crucial. And this discussion, with, of course, your region being very much at the heart of climate finance, is, of course, central. So if I could go to the next slide. And the next, basically, we know that, we are not doing well as far as the delivery of the climate goals are concerned. That was really evident in the global stocktake. And, our starting point is the reason we are not doing well is because the world is underinvesting in the low carbon transition. It is underinvesting in adaptation and resilience, and it is underinvesting in natural capital. This is particularly so in the developing world. In the last 4 years, there has been an uptick in clean energy investments, which is the backbone of the transition that we are seeking. However, 95% of that increment, 95%, was in advanced economies and in China. Only 5% in other emerging markets and developing countries, and that too dominated by India and Brazil. Second, we know that the gap between what we are spending on adaptation and resilience and what we need to spend on adaptation and resilience is growing. The numbers on adaptation in the last 2 years have been disappointing, and yet we can see the evident needs ahead. And third, we also know that the bulk of the world's natural capital is in the South. 90% of the world's natural capital in the South, yet 80% of the expenditure is in the North. The answer, therefore, is really an investment imperative that can accelerate the clean energy transition, an investment imperative that can close the gap on adaptation and resilience, and a spending imperative to close the financing needs on loss and damage, and finally, investment need on natural capital, including sustainable agriculture. And if you go to the next slide, you see that we break down the investments into what we call our climate and related SDGs, other SDGs, and the climate part, we break it down in turn into 4 components. The just energy transition, which is the bulk, adaptation and resilience, coping with loss and damage, natural capital, and sustainable agriculture. And to emphasize it, we add a 5th component, which is just transition, because this transition will entail dislocation. Altogether, the total amount of spending for the climate investments we anticipate by 2030, about 2.4 trillion, a 4-fold increase from estimated current levels. We move to the next slide. Although we talk about, the financing in aggregate terms, we have to recognize that different types of investments require different kinds of finance. We now know that the bulk of the investment requirements actually can be met by private investment and private finance. And that's a very different understanding than, even a few years ago. And this is particularly so for the just energy transition. But we also know that private finance and finance in general, but private finance for emerging markets and developing countries is not really available, it's not accessible, and it is not affordable. So kind of improving the availability, reducing the risks, and reducing the cost of that private finance is tremendously important. In terms of the most of the private finance until now is domestic, but we expect that international private finance will play a much, much more important role, increasing, maybe 15 to 20 times the current level. And that's why we need to create this new highway on private finance. Happy to come back to that later. Second, we also know that we will need a very significant uptick in development finance at all levels, national, regional, and multilateral. And on the multilateral side, as the G20 independent expert group, based on our work, concludes, we will need a tripling of multilateral development finance from now until 2030. Why is multilateral development finance so important? First, it is the most effective source of low-cost, long-term finance that we have. Second, it can work with other pools of finance, especially private finance, to try to ensure that the cost of capital is brought down significant. And third, it can reach countries which, are not well served, including and especially IDA countries. And the last point I want to make around the pools of finance is the importance of concessional and low-cost finance. Concessional and low-cost finance is needed to reach countries that are poor and vulnerable, especially for adaptation and resilience. But we also need highly concessional finance, particularly, of course, for damages related to climate change, including loss and damage. When you add these pools up, and if you go to the next slide, you will see that we can break down the pools of finance that are necessary into two overarching constituents, domestic and external. Of the 2.4 trillion, 1.4 trillion we see coming from domestic sources. Now, that is already the case, that the bulk of financing comes from domestic sources, but we feel that there is a need for continued improvement in domestic resource mobilization, including, as a colleague from Netherlands said, by elimination of harmful subsidies, putting in place carbon pricing, and also improving, of course, efficient tax effort. Notwithstanding the importance of domestic resource mobilization, we assess that we will need about 1 trillion in external finance by 2030. The bulk of that, as I mentioned, will come from private finance, something like 500 billion plus. At the moment, we are only mobilizing 20 to 30 billion. So this is the area of the big stretch. MDB finance will have to double, and we will have to have a very, very significant increase in concessional finance. We know that we are not doing very well on bilateral official development assistance, given the many pressures that countries are facing right now, including particularly war and conflict. But that increase is absolutely essential. The second point I want to make is that increase will not be sufficient because of the volumes of concessional finance that we need. And so there is a big push right now to come up with innovative sources of finance. And as you may know, President Macron, Prime Minister Motley, and President Ruto from Kenya have launched this new task force on international sources of finance, taxes, and otherwise. And I would argue would be a very important part of the new architecture going ahead. So all of these, have to come together. It's not a question of one aggregate number. It's about the pools of finance working together in a much more effective way. It is, if we do that, we will deliver on the climate. It's the only way we will deliver on the climate goals, but we will also deliver on the SDGs and on a better form of growth. So I will end with where I started. This is about an investment push, and it's about finding the right kind of finance to support that investment push. So we are not doing well, but the possibilities of getting to this goal are really quite good. And we have to all make a collective effort, including very critically the ESCAP region. Thank you, Hamza.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amar, for very clearly laying out the sense of urgency that is required to step up investments in support of climate action, and also highlighting a very important point that it's not just about official transfers when it comes to climate finance. A big role has to be played by private finance and by MDBs. And even within MDBs, they're the ones who can serve as catalysts for private finance itself. So once again, thanks a lot for supporting our work and supporting our event and joining really late hours from Washington. And let me now turn to Ms. Liske Van Hemert to hear a little bit about the current work of the coalition in the region, in the Asia Pacific region. Ms. Liske, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can also hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone, esteemed guests and panelists. My name is Liske van Hemert, and I am a Dutch policy advisor on the Dutch Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action co-chair team, currently working at the Dutch Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. Thank you so much for having me and for organizing this important event. I am very excited to share with you a little bit more about our strategic priorities and the regional engagement of the coalition, specifically for the Asia Pacific region. Next slide, please. Can you still hear me? It seems like I'm having some technical difficulties. All right, I'll continue. So there are 6 strategic priorities for 2024-2025, which hopefully you can see right here. Our first and second priority mostly pertain to increasing and deepening Ministry of Finance understanding of climate policy implementation instruments with a focus on impact on the ground. The third relates to our core business, enhancing peer-to-peer exchange, again with a focus on tangible action and implementation trajectories. The fifth and sixth priority are related to strengthening our engagement, both regarding the NDC process as well as with strategic partners and institutional partners. An excellent example of this coinciding is our NDC Joint Support Initiative with the NDC Partnership, which was launched during COP28. Finally, our fourth strategic objective, and the one I will tell you more about today, is activating member climate leadership by ministries of finance of all regions, specifically within the context of the Asia Pacific region, who as of right now has 17 members. Next slide, please. But first, some recent milestones. At our ministerial meeting during the World Bank IMF meeting in October, the launch of our first climate action statement took place, with multiple Asia-Pacific countries highlighting climate actions taken by ministries of finance. Furthermore, our annual in-person deputies meeting took place in The Hague in February, which was attended by numerous Asian countries as well. Here we discussed our strategic work program for 2024-2025, which was later adopted in March of this year. Finally, a very recent milestone that took place just last week was our 11th ministerial meeting during the IMF World Bank Spring meetings, in which the NDC process and the role of Ministry of Finance was discussed with an innovative format. Next slide, please. Regarding regional engagement, our strategic work program outlines 2 key priorities: regional ministerial champions, which Pekka also spoke about a little bit, and rolling out the ambassadors network. Regional ministerial champions are key for sharing pivotal messages of the coalition in regional fora and for initiating regional convenings with partner support. Countries from the region can best assess what is relevant and needed to discuss with partner countries in the region. The coalition is a member-driven initiative, so their proactive engagement is key for accelerating those discussions. Within the Asia-Pacific region, there are multiple regional convening opportunities, like the planned regional convening in Indonesia this year, the AIIB annual meeting of 2024, and the ASEAN Summit 2025. Second, the Ambassadors Network is a very recent innovation, which is set up to promote peer-to-peer interaction and empower members to take ownership of their involvement in the coalition as a community of practice. Country ambassadors are deployed as part of a proactive and reactive engagement strategy to disseminate the work of the coalition and help ministries of finance mainstream climate action into their activities in their respective countries and regions. Current Asian country ambassadors are Indonesia and Singapore, and Malaysia is invited to become one. Next slide, please. Finally, some upcoming milestones the coming months are the stocktake of our first climate action statement and the development of our second climate action statement as deliverables for the ministerial meeting at the World Bank IMF annual meeting in 2024. Furthermore, our NDC Joint Support Initiative, in which we, in collaboration with NDC Partnership, offer targeted resources and expertise for ministries of finance to actively engage in the development of NDCs and long-term low-emission development strategies. To provide the support, the thematic call on NDCs and LEDs, a targeted initiative, is used to assist countries in designing ambitious NDCs and LEDs implemented in alliance with the 2050 Pathway Platform, UNDP, and other institutional members. This was accelerated by our joint call to action following our last ministerial meeting. I will end with those words. I hope everything went well in regards to the technicalities. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you would like to hear more, please feel free to reach out.
Many thanks, Diske. Of course, we could hear you very, very clearly. I wish you best of luck in your pursuit. So far, there are only 17 members. We want to see those numbers go up in the coming years. Let me now move to the discussion segment of our event today. I think we have a decent understanding now of the overall context of the work of the coalition, the role of finance ministries, the needs for investment gaps, and what's going on in the region in this regard, thanks to this excellent presentation. So let me start with Pekka. Pekka, the coalition's recently published report that you briefly alluded to underscores the importance of ministries of finance in needing to be at the heart of driving economic transformation in response to climate change. Your report also notes that there is, and you had a slide on that today, that there is a substantial disconnect between the ambition of national climate strategies and the policies and resources provided to meet this ambition. The question is, how can this disconnect be overcome? How can ministries of finance ensure that adequate resources are provided for and drive the economic transformation required for climate change?
Thank you, Hamza. When it comes to the overall governance, it's the countries that are addressing these problems efficiently. Of course, they need the highest level mandates from presidents and prime ministers. So the climate governance at the national level is absolutely critical. But I would respond to your question based on very recent discussions that we had in Washington. We had about coalition organized around 10 different discussions, many of them at high level. I would particularly take on two. One on developing long-term strategies, because if you talk about investments, the biggest obstacles have to do with lack of visibility of future prospects and uncertainties. So in the context of creating sort of a vision also for access to finance, it kind of links to the creditworthiness of the countries. There needs to be credible policies. And those were discussed last week. And also the context of developing assessment frameworks to understand modeling tools, to understand how the dynamics moves, what are the physical risks, transition risks. Of course, the adaptation nature issues are very important for the Asian countries. But my final point maybe is also to understand the short-term macroeconomic challenges. There are high debt levels, geopolitical risks, inflation picking up, and so forth. So there's a big need to sort of understand how this affects the climate policies, and everything needs to be put in the context of whole government approach. So that would be my answer to your question.
Thanks, Becca. Very clear, ranging of getting the mandates, having long-term strategies, developing technical capacities, modeling abilities, and even dealing with short-term immediate challenges are the key reasons why there's still a bit of a disconnect between what finance ministries can do. Thank you. Let me move on to Amar. Amar, the independent high-level expert group published a recent report, November 2nd edition, I believe. It outlines how engagement of all key stakeholders is critical to accelerating and implementing investment for climate action. Among all the stakeholders, governments, the private sector, MDBs, and others, why is it important and perhaps challenges for governments to take a leadership role in establishing country platforms to facilitate finance and investment for climate action?
Thank you, Hamza. As you said, we are in a hurry. We have to scale up investment and do it quickly and ensure that it is economically, financially, environmentally sustainable. The only way we are going to do that is if all stakeholders come together behind country-led, country-owned, country-specific plans. And these country platforms are one way to do that. In the case of Indonesia, there's a Just Energy Transition platform, which Indonesia has come forward with, and the international community can then engage with that, including the private sector. There are other such platforms in South Africa, in Senegal, in Vietnam, and we don't have to only think about these platforms for energy. One area where such platforms are direly needed is actually for adaptation and resilience. And we are beginning to see some progress. There are both country-specific examples and partnerships. For example, what the Asian Development Bank is doing with Bangladesh, I think is a very good example. But there's also an initiative coming from the V20, the Vulnerable 20, which is a very large representation from your region to come up with prosperity plans. And the articulation of these prosperity plans can help bring together, all stakeholders behind the country platforms. And I think, ESCAP could really help, in some sense, understand what makes good platforms and, facilitate discussions of that amongst your membership. I would also close by saying that country platforms will figure quite prominently in the Brazilian G20. Brazil itself has come forward with an ecological transformation program that is quite ambitious, and we are beginning to see initiatives in support of that. For example, the IDB has come forward with an Eco-Invest program to support the ecological transformation program. And very recently, the Glasgow Financial Alliance and the biggest development bank, outside China, Benedez, have come together in terms of support from the private sector, both in terms of projects, preparation, and building of pipelines, but then also the financing that would be necessary. So this is an area where there's a scope for a lot of innovation right now. And I think, having this as one of the kind of areas of focus in ESCAP would be very valuable.
Thank you, Amar. Indeed, thanks for highlighting the importance of country-led initiatives and platforms. And of course, inclusive organizations such as UN are always there to support countries in this endeavor, along with several other partners, and we will continue to do so going forward. Your remark on the country-level initiatives helps us move to the next speaker quite naturally. So let us hear from the experience of a coalition member themselves, Ms. Diaz. Let me now turn to you for your country's experience in engaging with and being part of the coalition. So as you know, currently there is a lot of work being done on the ground by coalition members in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly when it comes to financing nationally determined contributions. What opportunities are there in the Asia-Pacific regions for the ministries of finance to play a role in the development and implementation of financing plans to achieve NDC targets? How has the Philippines Department of Finance approached this issue, and what are the initiative efforts being ongoing in your country? Ms. Diaz, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Hamza. First, I'd like to thank the organizers of this workshop for the opportunity for giving the Philippines an opportunity to share our experiences and our initiatives for climate action. So access to financing is the primary engine that fuels climate action. This is the reason why finance ministries play a crucial role in directing important climate policies. In a recent study of the coalition, it shows that the Asia-Pacific region would need $2.4 trillion to finance climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts and to ensure a just transition in developing economies by 2030. This presents an opportunity for finance ministries to tap into regional collaboration within the Asia-Pacific to drive climate action towards the development of a comprehensive fiscal policy and inclusive investment infrastructure to finance its respective plans for fulfilling their NDCs. In the Philippines, the Department of Finance functions as the lead agency that manages the government's financial resources by formulating fiscal policies and facilitating access to various international climate financing. Running in parallel with our current efforts to further our climate action, the President of the Philippines has expressed interest to be the country host for the Loss and Damage Fund Board. This shows our commitment to insurance and disaster preparedness mechanisms. Furthermore, the DOF, together with our Climate Change Commission, leads the country's Interagency Task Force on Sustainable Finance, or the Green Force, which functions as the national oversight agency, coordinating efforts among government institutions to develop a coherent financial strategy to mainstream climate finance. On behalf of the Philippine government, the Department of Finance is proud to share that concrete pillars have been established to realize our NDC commitments through our NDC financial strategy, which would require $72 billion to facilitate the policies and measures needed for key sectors such as agriculture, energy, transport, industrial processes, and product use and waste. The financial strategy has actually identified particular investments which need particular investment needs, such as the energy sector, where financing requirements are pegged at almost $36.5 billion. The purpose of this is to prioritize investments in transmission and grid improvement and expansion of financial structures to support rapid scaling up of renewable energy and energy efficient investments. Another sector with identified needs is transportation, which estimates about $33 billion in investments for mass transportation infrastructure. These are currently implemented or will be supported by public sector budgets, global climate funds, development partners, and the private sectors. The DOF will translate these plans into concrete climate mitigation efforts through the following activities. First is the development of a monitoring, reporting, and verification system, or the MRV system. We are collaborating with development partners to design a comprehensive tool that will monitor progress within domestic and international climate finance to help identify gaps and financing needs required to implement the PAM's portfolio. Second is the creation of an of an enabling environment to increase capital flows of sustainable activities from public and private sectors. The DOF is doubling its efforts to introduce fiscal and economic policies to create an enabling environment for public and private sector participation in greening the Philippine economy. This includes a robust regulatory framework such as the Public-Private Partnership Code, which enables the facilitation of blended financing for climate action. Moreover, the creation of the pilot version of our Sustainable Finance Taxonomy Guidelines, or the SFTG, enables banks and other financial institutions in the Philippines to steer their investment towards environmentally and socially sustainable activities. Along with these transformative efforts, the Philippines also introduced significant efforts to incentivize the private sector in green investments through the CREATE Law, or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Law, the Strategic Investment Priority Plan, or the SIPP, and the overarching principle of the Sustainable Finance Roadmap. Next is the promotion of market-based mechanisms and identification of potential financing for NDC, future development of NDC financial strategy, and the long-term vision. The DOF is working with the World Bank in developing a carbon pricing instrument, potentially through a complementary implementation of a carbon tax and emissions trading system. Likewise, our Department of Environment and Natural Resources is working towards the development of a roadmap that will provide coherent guidelines in the voluntary carbon market. With these efforts combined, the DOF will ensure a comprehensive pricing mechanism that will seamlessly integrate with the existing national tax system. Next is the exploration of blue and green bonds to accelerate private investment in climate finance. The private sector holds great potential in ensuring the timely delivery of NDC commitments and implementation of the policies and measures for key focus sectors. In accordance with the first version of the NDC financial strategy, the DOF will closely work with various government agencies in the Philippines, such as the Department of Budget and Management, the Bureau of the Treasury, our Securities and Exchange Commission on bond issuances to augment the potential of climate finance through market regulatory oversight and financial intermediaries. So those are the initiatives of the DOF in the Philippines towards climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz, for sharing these details, country-level initiatives that are being going on. I hope the countries listening into this event would have benefited from some of the insights, and they can get in touch with you if they want to know further details. Let me now turn to my colleague Suba here, sitting next to me. Suba, as you know, in ESCAP, your team led the publication of this 5th biennial financing or development report of ESCAP in 2023. The title was Sustainable Finance, Bridging the Gap in Asia and the Pacific. So you've heard from the Ministries of Finance, you've heard some country perspective. One element which has not been highlighted, and drawing from that ESCAP's own report, can you share very quickly in 2-3 minutes, what can central banks and regulators do to accelerate financing for climate action in the Asia-Pacific region?
Thank you, Hamza. And thank you very much also to the work of the coalition and the independent high-level expert group. Our report really drew upon those findings and built upon that. So I think, as Amar mentioned or highlighted, the gap of the financing required to meet the SDGs, nature and climate, the remaining gap, the bulk of it is actually going to come from private finance. So, for example, domestic credit to the private sector provided by financial institutions is 47% of GDP in South Asia alone, and it's 172% of GDP in East Asia and the Pacific. Central banks have a critical role in regulating such financial flows. That is without a doubt. But there's a huge debate within central banks today, especially in Asia and the Pacific, which is lagging behind Europe and North America, about how far and how fast central banks should be going. This is, of course, related to their mandate in redirecting such private capital towards climate action. So for us, what are 3 actions that central banks can take? And I'm focusing only on their microprudential role in supervising banks. First is the concern of the entire financial system is to ensure an orderly transition, to maintain price stability, liquidity. What do we need for that? We need clear, harmonized, and decisive regulation to ensure that FIs and their clients, their real economy clients, have credible net zero transition plans. This is an area that Asia Pacific is actually lagging behind more advanced economies. Secondly, of course, we need data. We hear this a lot, but why do we need data? We need data because we are in uncharted territory. We don't actually know yet clearly how financing is going to achieve the clear science-based targets that national commitments have set out. So disclosure requirements, which is drives data, is critical, but that can only be done if regulators begin to mandatorily integrate disclosure requirements into reporting frameworks. Currently, most of those are voluntary. And finally, is to ensure that time, attention, effort, and resources are invested into the capacities of financial personnel across the region, whether it's central banks, securities markets, or FIs, financial institutions. They need to understand, navigate, and prepare their institutions for a transition, which will involve massive changes to business as usual. It may sound boring or technical, but it is absolutely essential, especially for LDCs who may otherwise get left out or left behind. So I'll stop there, but I think there's enormous scope for central banks to act in this area.
Thank you, Suba. As an ex-central banker, I can tell you they are a very conservative bunch. So you need to push them a little bit on these lines, but I fully agree. And I hope it gels well with the messages coming from Paka and Amar also. That is a multi-stakeholder effort, actually. It's not just government. It's just not about private finance. It's not just about MDBs. They have to come in together because the scale of investments needed is enormous. I'm very cognizant of time here. And I had a series of follow-up questions to my participants, which I'll skip. However, I have this one interesting thing which I try to do when we are out of time. So with the indulgence of my panelists, I will actually give you 30 seconds. And the question is same to everyone. Imagine that whatever you're going to say is going to be tomorrow's headline news. So what is the main fundamental message on the subject that you like to leave us with in 30 seconds or maximum 1 minute? Let me start with you, Pekka.
My first message is coming from what Jeddah said. Give floor to finance ministers, and that the things start happening. If you look at the experiences from the Philippines, the list of issues got my pulse raising high because there were so many issues, but it tells me that things are moving in many across the different policy areas. So that's exactly what should be happening. And second is regional cooperation. I give you an example quickly from Nordic countries. Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, we established the carbon tax in the 1991 all at the same time, because there are regional issues involved. That would be also what Jeddah was saying from Philippines. Think about regional solutions. They benefit, need to design coordinated action. That would be the second message.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, very precise. We live and breathe regional cooperation, so it's music to our ears. Amar, same thing to you, same question. What is the one key message you want to convey in 30 seconds?
Our planet is on fire. If we act on dousing that fire out, we will create a new and sustainable growth path for the region and for the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to douse that fire for sure. Liske, over to you with the same urgency.
I will keep it concise, collaborate and work together to achieve our shared goals, like the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. Thank you very much.
That's an important component of accelerating financing climate action for sure. Ms. Diaz, over to you. Final thoughts.
Once again, I would like to reiterate that the Philippines is very much committed to realizing our climate financing strategy, and it has integrated within our investment and finance framework until 2030 to scale up more climate financing. But to realize this, we have to push forward improvements in our country's programming, such as with the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. We have to advance co-financing and design innovative mechanisms to fund our National Adaptation Plan and channel financing and technical assistance towards scaling up our national funds, such as the dedicated domestic fund. For the Philippines, we have the People Survival Fund, which champions adaptation and risk financing and loss and damage implementation at the local level. So we are empowering local government units. We have to recognize the importance of financial and technical resources to propel the country's efforts towards achieving its NDC commitments with policies and measures directed to focus sectors. We have to establish support policies that enable foreign direct investments and optimize private sector participation in green investment through the provision of incentives such as the SIPP. And finally, we have to take a lead role in global actions for the Philippines. It's our commitment to host the it's our commitment by bidding to be the host of the Loss and Damage Fund board. So that's it for the Philippines. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Diaz. Some of the messages will go to page 2, but there's some headline there for sure. Thank you. Suba, last words.
The last word is along what we were saying, very much that financial regulators need to work decisively, clearly, and in a harmonized fashion to redirect private capital.
This is on private capital. Excellent. So being very cognizant, right on time, we have a couple of more minutes. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, for joining us today. And as shared earlier, some of you are joining from very, very awkward time zones. I know many of you wanted to come here in person, just couldn't happen because it just could not happen because of multiple commitments. So really, really appreciative of your commitment to our conversation on this subject. Thank you all once again. Before concluding, let me now hand over the floor to Ms. Lin Yang, our Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP, for her closing remarks. Lin, over to you.
Thank you, Hamza. Thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Wu Jinggarden, and Mr. Moring, Mr. Bhattacharya, Ms. Tu Siko, and Ms. Hamlet. I have to say that it's not in the concluding remarks, as I would like to just share a few reflections, because many points were discussed and in today's side events. I would say it deserves a dedicated seminar. Probably we'll find another opportunity. Many points raised here deserves more in-depth discussion. And I think that also requires wider participation and the contribution to those issues, in particular in this region, in the Asia-Pacific region. 3 very quick reflections after. This is my first commission session, and since I joined the ESCAP, and very, very strong feeling I have in the past week. It's very, very dynamic, still a very dynamic region. This morning, when I presented the work of ESCAP, I highlighted that in the past year, Asia-Pacific continued to show the resilience, the economic resilience. This type of resilience is not just shown in last year. It in the past few years, in particular in the context of the multiple crises. And also, if we look back, we see that here in this region, we have this big emerging economies like China, India. We also have our Asian tiger economies. And we have, right now, we see many rising stars like Bangladesh, Kazakhstan, and etc. So here, the region, and I think only last week in New York, 19th April, at the global level, they have the global stock taking on the energy, SDG Goal 7. Very strong message from this region, Asia-Pacific, based on the regional consultation, was that many countries see the whole transition as opportunities. But we need to put this in the whole context of climate action. and how to harness the opportunities to address the challenges. So in this regard, I strongly request the coalition and also our partners, our friends, to work with us to forge this narrative. This is a region we shall be confident. This is a region we shall work together to create opportunities. This is a region we will be able to chart a path for a green development and sustainable and more resilient. So that is the one point I would like to share with the colleagues. Second is very strong feeling also. I attended over 10 side events, also met with some delegates. In this round of transformation, also in the journey of transition, we see that we need a stronger political commitment, as well as a policy and the behavior change. Those will be crucial in the whole journey to ensure that energy generation, transport and ICT infrastructure, consumption pattern, production processes are transformed. And also in the whole process, in one side event, I also emphasized that we need to make sure that in this round of development, I think one panelist, I think is Mr. Bhattacharya, in his concluding remarks, saying that we need a new kind of growth that we can manage the social and the economic development in a better way. So however, incentivizing, steering, and advancing the transformation is very, very complex. It's complex in particular at the national level. I think our case study, the story shared by our Philippine panelists already showcased the complexity. So what can we do? Here in ESCAP, we see a huge capacity building gap to failing to enable the governance and the institutions for the transformation. So here I would like to send a strong call to our partners, to member states, and to the different stakeholders to work with us to filling this call, to filling this gap. That will be very, very crucial for the next stage. Last but not least is the linkages. I worked in New York for some while and witnessing all of those global processes. By joining ESCAP, I see a strong necessity to bring the synergies and also recognizing the stronger interlinkages of global, regional, and the national processes and the initiatives. I heard one comment in one roundtable by a panelist, very, very straightforward and also very simple, 2 points. That consolidates our initiatives, that's reinforce the existing mechanisms, period. So those are the 3 reflections, very personal, I would like to share with the participants and our dear panelists. This is a region, ESCAP has a big platform here, is a region with a great diversity. Some practices can be applied here, some probably not. So that requires our collective efforts to explore together, to help our member states together. This is an open platform. This is an inclusive platform. Please let us work together to achieve the common ambition. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for these very heartfelt observations. I think it was very nicely done. I think that brings to a conclusion. Thank you all for participating today, and best wishes for your remaining engagements during the commission, and to our colleagues joining online, have a rest of the productive day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.